Up next, presenting a panel discussion on CEO strategies.
Good morning, colleagues. Welcome back. Will the frog food people and the Metrofiber people just quiet down now? Can I ask my esteemed panel members to join me on stage? Jan, Dietlof, Dion, and Abram. I think I'm so proud of this panel because I think it's the first time in as long as the Digital Council is old that we've had a panel like this. We've always been nervous and don't want to put people together, and especially in the early days, before the market was mature. And today I'm really excited to host what I think is the leadership of the sector on a panel today. And these are the guys that are making it work and that have put in a tremendous effort to build a sector over the last 12, 13 years, and that have created what it is today. So thank you for all the yellow tape in the road. No, I'm joking. That's not what we're going to talk about. But yeah, I think there's a lot that we can be proud of as an industry. There's a lot that has happened over the last 13 years. I had the privilege of listening to Dietlof yesterday talking about what's lying ahead. And if you think about it, a decade ago, what's outside here didn't exist. There was no need to have conferences, panel discussions, to talk and find solutions and to come together. And today, if you just walk around on the floor, and if you yesterday saw the amount of people that were here, people that are coming together, it's as a result of a sector that didn't exist a mere decade ago. So well done to all of you guys for the hard work and having all the stress. So it's a privilege for me this morning to be able to share just some insights, and I know that there's also always a lot of questions that people have, to just share some insights. And there's a lot of debates that's going on in the market about a lot of stuff, and we're going to ask some of those questions this morning, a little bit of the more tougher questions, some of the things that we know that a lot of you guys are thinking about, but maybe don't have access to asking those questions. So without further ado, I think people need very little introduction. I'm going to just start with Dion Geyser on my left immediately, CEO of Liquid Intelligence Technologies, South Africa focus. Dietlof Maria, who's the CEO of Vumatel. Next to him, Jan Bezuidenhout, who's the CEO of Metrofiber Networks. And next to him, Abram van der Merwe, who's the CEO of Frogfoot Networks. So I'm really privileged to have at least 3 of them serve on my board as well. They work very hard for no money, but that's a different conversation. But Dietz, I'm going to start with you and ask you the first question. There was an IT Web article that was dated, I think, 14 September, in which RAIN said that they've passed 7 million homes with 5G. And that's almost double the amount of homes passed by all the FNOs combined. So with the abundance of spectrum that's been made available for companies like RAIN, all the MNOs, we know that there's an ITA out again now. Do you think that it'll have an impact on the future of fiber rollouts? And especially because the MNOs are claiming costs and speed to market and all of these things. Do you think we should be concerned, or are you concerned? Are you lying awake at night?
No. Yeah, thanks, Juanita. So yes, I think it's super positive that the spectrum was made available. That's the first thing. RAIN's obviously deploying because it's an air type of coverage type of scenario. So they're going to basically cover, I would say, half of South Africa, or even more than that when Vodacom and MTN comes in the near future. So it's definitely going to be there. But like I've always said, and I think we've all discussed this quite a few times, is I see fixed and mobile 5G, fixed wireless, definitely complementing one another. So for me, the big thing is, if you look at what's happening in the rest of the world, and we saw some of the presentations yesterday as well, it's about speed, it's about throughputs. A few years ago, we were seeing people using 6 gigs total. Today, we're seeing in Mitchell's Plain, people using a household using 400 gigs per house. So we're seeing 8-10 devices basically active in those places. And it's data in abundance again. And it doesn't matter how you look at it, mobile is still based on a scarce resource, which is spectrum. And it's linked to a capex, it's linked to penetration rates of 5G devices, it's linked to a few things. But I think it's totally complementary. So my take on this is still that we should get to the 19 million homes on a dedicated service, because that's where data is going to. You looked at it yesterday. I mean, people are going to use a gig down service in time, speed-wise, up and down. That's what Europe's going to have. In the next 6 years, that's what the norm will be. So how do you do that on a mobile network? It's going to be difficult. But I think the convergence between a mobile and a fixed is the way it has to go, because you have to stay connected always. It doesn't matter where you are. So for me, I think in the beginning, yes, I think they're gonna get some traction. It's going to work well. I think what you're going to see from MTN and Vodacom as well, they're going to go aggressive. But then you look at it from a fiber point of view, on an access side, DFA will play a big role in actually connecting those towers, connecting the sites. So we've got Liquid on, so I think there's a huge market where we can create an access layer, and there's a huge market that we can differentiate on data in abundance, and obviously from a price point, I think it might and will compete quite aggressively. So I'm not too worried about it now.
Okay. Dion, so if we then look at other technologies, other potential threats to the fiber sector, for instance, technologies like Starlink. So we know it's delayed, but we know that they've got great ambitions. They make a lot of announcements about how they want to capture market share, and how they think that they can deliver a great, reasonable product for Africa. And for instance, things like the iPhone 14, I mean, that comes with a built-in chip already for satellite connectivity. Do you think that's a contender?
Thanks, Juanita. I think maybe before I answer that question specifically, I think I'll answer the question from a Liquid perspective first. As many of you know, as Liquid, we have a 100,000-kilometer fiber network throughout the continent from Cape Town to Cairo. We do invest into 5G assets. We do invest into wireless assets, point to multipoint. And of course, we also have very good satellite assets. We just signed a contract with Eutelsat, bringing Ka-band services into the continent. And I think one has to look at the use cases of each, right? Because, I mean, as Deepak pointed out, right, if you look at the home use case, you'll see that there is a significant amount of capacity being driven by the use case of what people are doing in a home. And let's be honest, the Netflix of the world, smart TVs, a lot of that consumption is being driven by that specific use case. If you think about going outside of metros and you're going to more rural areas, you of course sit with a scenario where potentially fiber is not yet available. And actually, interestingly enough, the amount of money which is being spent specifically on satellite R&D and innovation to make that more efficient is becoming quite interesting for bringing satellite services into Africa. Now, yes, Starlink, as an example, uses low Earth orbit satellites, which will offer high capacity, low latency type services. Will that be able to compete with fiber? From an experience perspective, my view is no. But I do believe that there is this, let's call it, use case where it will become relevant. If I just take our business and our satellite business, we've actually seen great growth in that the last 24 months. And if you take the South Africa scenario, that's been driven by the fact that in many rural towns, people have been relying on 4G services, but with no power being available on these towers, people are opting to use satellite as a backup service, as an example, or for ATM services, or for retail services. So I guess one has to look at the use case. What are you trying to solve? If you look at home, I think that there will be a use case in rural areas where satellite will become a scenario because they will become more efficient, high capacities, lower latency that can offer those services. That's what we invest into. I don't think from an experience perspective we'll be able to compete into fiber. That's why we will continue to invest into fiber and other technologies as well.
Thanks for that. Jan, I want to ask, I'm going to stick a little bit to sort of a theme. I'm trying to get a theme going on the business case, making the business case work, things like that. So the latest Ftth tracking report, and the numbers don't always add up. I think Dr. Thomas was saying yesterday, depending on which report you read, but you know, they're near as they can get. But it looks like we've, out of all the homes that we've built to date, and we're going to launch the latest research later this afternoon, there is still an overbuild of about 870,000 homes. So as a sector, we always talk about the cost is in the trench. The cost is in the trench, you know. Does it make sense? Why? Where? You know, how does it, you know, if almost 20% of the total homes passed, you know, that translates to about 4.5 or 5.5 billion rand, and that's just simply duplicated capex. It doesn't make sense. Like, is this a trend that we see, or what are some of the thinking and reasons behind this?
Yeah. So thanks, Unita. I think if you look at the numbers, it's actually closer to 26% of unique homes passed, where you have that duplication of infrastructure, and that's not good. It's not good for the industry, and it's not good for consumers. And I'll tell you why. Rolling out fiber networks is an extremely capital-intensive endeavor. Everyone around the table or on the floor here will tell you that. Lots of capital required. The people who are supporting these capex rollouts or deployments, being our equity partners and our debt funders, they require a return or a yield on the capital that they put to work. So if we're duplicating capital, and you can imagine in an overbuild scenario what the relative performance looks like from a take-up perspective, a unique home situation versus an overbuild precinct, it's not comparable. And what that does is, you know, funders, both on the equity and debt side, look at the returns and the yields that are provided out of those areas, and they lose confidence, right? And all that does is it takes capital that would have otherwise been available out of the system, and that then translates into a detrimental effect on consumers in that underserviced areas won't have capital available to them, or it'll take longer to get capital to go and service those underserviced markets. And from a consumer perspective as well, you know, if there's an open access provider that comes into your neighborhood, you know, having an additional F&O there doesn't really provide much more in terms of choice, because on each of our networks we have the same ISPs that provide services to the end customers at very similar sort of price levels. So it's not a good thing. I don't think it's you know, something that's positive for the industry at all.
Yet, Abram, some people say it creates more awareness, and you know, it's good for consumers because consumers have choice. And you know, your take?
Thanks, Unita. I echo Jan's sentiments. I mean, the whole concept behind open access networks are that we don't want to duplicate infrastructure because it's very expensive. We want to give consumers choice, so really we want to limit the open access infrastructure to the kind of dumb pipes that we actually sell, and give all the ISPs that have the clever kind of value-added services, you know, they operate on top of these networks. They can come up with different and innovative packages and give the consumer choice. But the moment you start duplicating the infrastructure, then essentially the cost for the consumer goes up, because you know, it's a simple equation. It's really, you spend the same amount of money to build the infrastructure in an area, and if your tenancy increases on that network, then you can charge less for the same service on the network. If your tenancy decreases, then you have to charge more for the service to recoup your investment. So if there's multiple operators in the same area, then the tenancy is going to drop. and they're going to have to charge more. So it's counterintuitive, but essentially the consumer ends up paying more in the long run.
Yeah, which is really what we're trying to reduce, especially, Dietlof, if you're trying to get into lower income areas. I mean, you know, I've framed a very intelligent question that I wanted to ask you about, you know, some of the especially Vumaki products. But I'm just going to say, how do you do it? Like, I mean, how do you get there?
I think it was first a mindset shift, you know, and I think it was a little bit of luck as well. You know, we were sitting there in the boardroom the one day and we discussed it, and I can remember Joe and Neil still sitting, the founders of Vuma, sitting there totally disagreeing with us, and then I had Kobus' support on the one side, and it started with prepaid. It started with the collection leg of it. You know, we couldn't go into any lower LSM area because we couldn't go through a normal collection type of a cycle. That just doesn't work, you know. So I was luckily there years ago when we launched prepaid in Vodacom, and we said, listen, why not prepaid, you know? And suddenly we worked on it, built a little prepaid platform, and we made it happen. And I think it started there. Firstly, it's a mindset shift. You say, listen, that make the impossible possible type of thing. And then the second thing is just get solutions that can obviously address those issues that are total blockers, you know, because and prepaid was definitely one of it. And then it's getting the cost down. And I think all of us, I mean, our biggest challenge is to get that cost of deployment down, to make sure what you give at the end is a service that's good. So you can't skimp on the quality. I think as you go into the lower tiers of the segments of the industry, actually your quality should be more guaranteed. It sounds weird, but it's more important. That connectivity there is much more critical. And that's why you'll see in the past a million solutions on wireless and how they do, and content and Wi-Fi and all that things that they try to do in these areas never worked because the quality was never good enough, you know. And we had to get to a point where we got the cost down without jeopardizing on the quality leg of it. And I think that's where we're getting to, you know. So it's maybe not as neat as a trench network, you know. It's going to look a little bit different to what you see maybe in a Sandton type of a Parkhurst type of a suburb. But I think we're getting to a point where you can create a solution where it's a dedicated line into a house. And I think we're very close to launching. We're actually POCing it at this point, but getting to 100 rand per month service for a 20 meg type of a service. You know, a little bit more contended than a pure reach area, but still a throughput of at least 20 meg service in that dwelling. And that's the 9.6 million homes we have to get to. And we discussed it yesterday a little bit. You know, if we can get that right, then I think we're going to achieve our goals in totally connecting South Africa and changing the way we do business. And so if I can summarize quickly, mindset, firstly, absolutely getting to solutions that make sense, like a prepaid platform, addressing the issues, not jeopardizing on quality, and then having a team of people that just do it. You know, they go out there, we hit a brick wall, and then we go around it and we deliver. And I think we're very close to a solution on that. You know, but you go into Brazil, they're doing it there as well. You know, you go into some other markets, Africa not at this point, but there are markets in the world that are getting it right. You know, and I think South Africa is leading in some of those areas at this point. You know, and then you need competition. You know, you need people to also follow it, copy it, because these are not like amazing solutions and inventions and innovative things. People have to copy you because we need to get the 9.6 million homes connected. And I agree with this. We shouldn't overbuild because our scarce resource is the capital we employ. It's like, and we're just wasting it if we come and duplicate. And there's places where we actually now building, there's 3-4 networks in areas. You know, and that's not going to work like that. You know?
And some of the reasons for this overbuild, I mean, is it really because you're trying to get somewhere else? Because people will say, I'm trying to get there, so I had to, or
I think
is
it's legacy swap out. I think the biggest culprit at this point is a legacy swap out where they rip out copper and replace with fiber. So in your old, you know, your old kind of households, you know, traditional fixed line type of, copper line solutions, the places that we already cover, those places are being overbuilt like crazy at this point, you know, and I think it's good in a way, but I think you can deploy things differently in other ways as well.
So I just want to, Dion, I'm going to come to you now because I want to speak to you a little bit about, ubiquitous connectivity, but I just want to, so we know that CompCom prohibits operators from engaging at various levels. One of them is to discuss geographic locations. But in Europe, they've changed some of that to allow, because it's so expensive to achieve, so to allow operators to talk to each other more frequently and to plan better. Is there, Abram, would there be some benefit in that, to have more conversations, or do you prefer it where there's this very strict competition and who gets there first is there first, but that often results in overbuilds? Or do you think that there's room for some better coordination, rather is the word?
I don't think it's an intelligence problem. So everybody knows where everyone is pulled. I think the culprit really is, as Ftth said, is that if you enter a market with a new technology and there's an incumbent in that area or multiple providers in that area that has some other technology and they see I'm going to lose my base because somebody else is going to really replace me, then they have a natural incentive to go and build a network as well and convert the existing legacy base onto that network. And that really is when you start seeing overbuild occur. And sometimes it gets really ridiculous and everybody takes a bath. I mean, we have built a network in one area where there's now 7 operators that have overbuilt each other. So if you have a scenario like that, nobody ends up making money because it's just a stranded asset. But that is the thinking that drives overbuild. It is not a question of, you go and enter into a market and you think you're going to be the only one and then, somebody else does the same thing and you end up both overbuilding each other. That really happens. So you can see in the land grab phase of the fiber rollouts when you suddenly had multiple kind of fiber operators building into areas, we had overlap, but we had very little overlap. But what we really see is the incumbent that's now going through a kind of a systemic sort of overbuild, like let's just go and cover everywhere because we're losing all our customers and we don't want to do that. And you see the same happening with, especially the wireless operators they were the incumbent in a small town and now suddenly there's a fiber operator and they're starting to lose their shit and as a result they are also building a network. And that's really how we
Beep.
see
Sorry,
that.
it's a bit late. Yeah, that's a good point. Jan, did you want to close on that?
No, I think it's just a really bad idea. It's a bad situation. We should try and avoid it because that capital can be deployed far more efficiently and effectively in underserviced areas as opposed to duplicating.
Yeah, exactly. So we have to find solutions for that because, as an industry association, the most difficult thing that you can do in my world is to find sort of a sweet policy that suits everybody. So you don't want over-regulation, that doesn't suit anybody, but you also need some regulation that enables the market, that makes it easier for everybody to deploy. But we've seen in the draft rapid deployment policy, not the bylaws, the model bylaws, but in the draft rapid deployment policy, that they're trying to sort of make it illegal to overbuild. So, and there are going to be cases where you have to have some overbuild because you're en route somewhere, but so we're going to have to be, as a sector, we're going to have to find solutions to this, or, otherwise they're going to sort it out for us, and that's not ideal because that becomes very, very difficult. So Dion, I wanted to just ask you, talking about trying to connect everybody, and we know we always tout the numbers and the increasing GDP and all the good things that broadband does and how it serves countries, improve everybody's lives. Do you think that we need support from government, either in the form of grants, incentives, financial support, for them, from them, or you know, we listened earlier to Gary announcing and talking about, you know, what the US is doing. I mean, there's tremendous amount
money
of
going in.
financial resources available.
From our point of view, I mean, let me give you an example. I mean, we started to build the Western Cape government program 8 years ago. So over a period of time, we've connected 2,700 government buildings. And actually, funny enough, that fiber network that we built through that program is now becoming the backhaul which many of these township fiber networks will actually use to go into those areas. So I guess the example I'm using is to say that while that project started some time ago, right now is a season where the incremental value of that is actually becoming available for the rest of the market. So I do believe that, I don't think that we'll ever get to the form of grants like the US and other markets. Let's be quite frank. I mean, we're struggling to get the lights on literally. So I don't think that we will get there. But the form of public-private partnerships in the example of Western Cape Government, the one we're rolling out right now in Eastern Cape Government, is actually, you know, a form of a partnership with government which allows connectivity to go into a province or part of the country which would not have been served otherwise. Eastern Cape Government, as an example, we just passed our first milestone, 600 connected buildings now in June. We have 7,500 kilometers of fiber to build in the coming 18 months. The economic rationale to build that ourselves would not have been there. You know, we've completed NLD 5 and 6 build, which unlocked, you know, a lot of these tier 2, tier 3 towns on, you know, Southern Cape, Eastern Cape areas. And I mean, that piece of fiber that we built is bringing fiber to the home for many of the towns in that area. Now, the next set of fiber we're building in that specific project would actually allow not the tier 2, tier 3 towns only, but actually the township areas and the underserved communities to actually get services. You know, we follow actually a very open mindset when we go and look at building fiber, putting fiber, and we first see who's there and take up fiber of anyone that is in the area. We could do that in the first phase, but the next 1,900 sites we have to connect, there's no one there. So actually, we're quite excited about the benefit it will bring to the province, and that's really the discussion we're having with the province, is to say, hey guys, we're bringing connectivity in as a base layer. What do we do on top of that? And we're going to our partners and saying, hey guys, we're actually going to lay fiber over here. What about fiber to site? What about FTTH? What about the adjacent benefit it will bring? Because to be quite frank, in order for us to actually have gone into that process, yes, we put the capital in, it's a long-term investment and return payback. We have to drive the adjacent benefits to make that business case work for our business. And it's not only in South Africa. You know, if I use an example in the DRC, and Dietlof, you spent quite a bit of time in the DRC. Last year we built a piece of fiber from the west coast of the DRC through to the eastern border, and we connected a town, Abujimai, which has got 4 million people. That town got connected to fiber, so you can imagine what that does for data services in that town. So I guess the point I'm making is, it is about partnerships. It is about government partnerships, but in our business, we've also taken the approach, it's not only about public-private partnerships, it's also about partnerships with industry that would allow us to get there. I mean, NLD 5 and 6 was a typical case and example where we know we have to get the fiber. How do we work together to get us there? And do joint forces about how do we actually look at rollout jointly. Of course, borrowing all forms of competition, commission requirements, et cetera, et cetera. So at the end of the day, will we get in a scenario of the US? I don't think so. But I think if I look at what the government is trying to do with SA Connect and other programs they're trying to solve, I think that there are opportunities over time. It just takes a lot of time, you know, for those to get there.
Yeah, we know that they've now approved specifically for Access Build some funding to trial, you know, through SA Connect, how that's going to work.
Correct.
Dietlof, would you want to have some of that money? Do you think it would help you, or are you? I know not, and I'm asking because not everybody needs it or wants the complexity in their models.
Yeah, Anita, you know, I'm a little bit private sector type of thing. You know, I love doing things. I think we need speed. You know, we need to. You know, I think when a lot of these policies will be finalized, I mean, most of the rollout would have happened. You know, so. I just think we must create that entrepreneurial spirit. We must make sure it makes financial sense. We must build those, you know, those disciplines in ourselves, because I mean, it makes financial sense. You know, and I think the banks are also playing a bit of a part in this whole thing by double financing all over the place. So I'm saying, as they're creating this little bit of a type of a over coverage type of a scenario. But You know, I'm always there for private sector. I think there's pockets, like some of the municipalities, you know, there's things in Saldanha Bay and those places, that can definitely work, you know, but you need speed. You don't need red tape, and you don't need you need speed, you need people that want to do the job, you have to get people just to execute. I think that's the critical thing. You need people that really want to make a difference at speed.
Yeah.
Because timing is our problem here. You know, I think if we can't get this right, Europe and the rest of the world will run away from us. And it's not 10 years from now, it's 5 years max from now.
Yeah.
And,
They're
and I
already
think that's
quite
the key.
far ahead. I
That's
mean,
exactly.
Yeah.
And we have to look at it. You look at where the education sits today. You look at how we can change education in this country, you know, and then you go look really at the areas that needs connectivity, and it's just not there, you know. And we saw it in COVID. I said it yesterday a little bit, you know. My thing was, you know, we took COVID and it was such fantastic because it worked, you know. But the issue was we didn't have enough homes connected. That was the biggest issue for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so I'm a little bit neutral on that one, Janita.
Jan, Abram, you want some money?
I think the big thing is that these subsidies serves a purpose and it acts as a catalyst. But to Dietlo's point is, if it comes too late, it means nothing, right?
Yeah.
So what we have here already is in this industry, the momentum is already going, the snowball's already going down the mountain. So there's no added fuel to the fire that you can really add. I mean, it's now just to leave private sector to actually go and complete the job. Yeah, so I don't think adding more rebates will really change the outcome of what is happening in the country.
Yeah. So, but it's like all like business case dependent. I mean,
Correct.
we can assume there are going to be people that will never. It's not gonna work. What?
Well, we've assumed that when we deploy it like the leafy suburbs. Now everyone's deploying the townships. So, you know, we always start with the low-hanging fruits, but
Yeah.
it never stops. As long as there's a business case, it will happen. But even when the business case doesn't exist, then, you know, private sector will find a way to make it happen. So I think everyone is targeting now the 11.7 million kind of homes that hasn't been connected. So I'm quite confident that in the end, you know, all 17 million homes will be connected. Maybe there will be a few that's deep rural and where the economics never make sense, but you know, there's clever people like Dion and his team that's actually finding, you know, adjacencies, as he said, that actually make it happen as well.
Yeah. Talking about deployment costs, Jan, what are some of these hidden items that makes up, you know, some of the deployment costs, and what are some of the major obstacles that could make it easier, other than, you know, just what we see? I mean, the trench and...
Yeah. So the obstacles are not really hidden. We're all aware of them and we all deal with them. And I think that, you know, if we can find a way to remove some of these obstacles, you know, that would work a lot better than getting a grant from government or incentivize us to deploy. As I said, we have, you know, willing and able capital providers that will provide the funding to go and reach these remaining homes if, you know, we can not duplicate infrastructure, if we can get back all to the areas that, you know, we need to go to. If we don't have, you know, anomalies in way leave applications and, you know, uncommercial demands made by municipalities in order to roll out to underserviced areas. If, you know, we have a lot of disruption from business forums. If we can find a way to deal with that, that will speed up deployment, it will, you know, boost return, and again, will enable us to reach these areas faster. And, you know, we've spoken about overbuild a lot, but I mean, that's one of the major obstacles for us when we roll out, is trying to make sure that, you know, contractors are not overbuilding other contractors that are busy in the area, because we're all looking at the same space, right? It's just about where it sits on your list of priorities, but we all know where to go next. And the easiest place to go is adjacent to your existing network.
Yeah.
So I think if we can remove those obstacles, you know, we don't need a lot of other regulatory type intervention, but they're tricky things to deal with.
And do you think that build and transfer, a lot of companies are doing that, so they're going out, they're getting rail lifts, they're building. Do you think that that could be some of the
it's
culprits?
good, but you know, the build and transfers are also sometimes overbuilt.
Well, exactly, that's the point.
You know, it's
Yeah.
so
And it's, yeah.
you don't want to duplicate, and there's a you know, perception that there's fast and easy money to be made here by building and selling at, you know, massive premiums, which is just not the case. You know, the numbers don't change. I always say it's like, you know, buying a piece of land in Camps Bay, you build a house and then you want to sell it for 5 times what it cost you. It's not, you're not going to get it.
Yeah. I'm going to just make a left turn, Abram. So there's like a lot of talk, a lot of things happening in the market. It's really exciting to be part of this market because it's something that's growing. And I thought I didn't have a job anymore. Now I hear that there's how many million homes?
11.7.
So we're going to keep going. But I want to talk also about market consolidation because I'm very concerned about my membership fees that keeps shrinking. No, I'm joking. but you know, jokes aside, you know, we've been saying for many, many years that we expect market consolidation, we expect further market consolidation, and we've seen smaller companies like being taken, and now we're seeing bigger companies and, you know, getting into this. Besides maybe just the existing transactions that are pending, do you think, and I know that Dietlof's not allowed to talk right now, so can somebody turn his mic off, please? But do you think that over and above that, it's something that we're going to see continue?
Well, I mean, it's as we've all said, the capital-intensive industry, so consolidation is natural because it doesn't make, you can't run a subscale business in this industry because you need capital. So consolidation is natural. I think there's just always a kind of a line that we don't want to cross. So I mean, if we take, for instance, you know, some markets we've had, if you take the cable industry, for instance, you would have had 50 cable operators in the market, and that's clearly not healthy. But it's consolidated down to 1 cable operator. That's not healthy either. So there's a little bit of a balance, and so we have to be careful to over-consolidate and end up with a duopoly or a monopoly. But at the same time, I mean, I think it's natural to assume that there's going to be further consolidation in the market. We simply can't have a situation where there's, you know, 50 or 100 subscale operators. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, 40 plus FNOs just currently building at some level. Yanyan, does it concern you at all?
No, I don't think it's a concern. I agree with what Abram's saying. I think it's, you know, you need to be careful to not over-consolidate, but, you know, I think there's space for, you know, a handful of large players to service the market, to compete with each other, and to make sure we cover, you know, all of the underserviced areas that, you know, that are still out there.
I'm just going to ask a bit of a random question, but as South Africans, I mean, I'd like to believe, to a large extent, like really perfected the models. I mean, Dietlof was saying earlier, I mean, like, we've gone where we thought we'd never go. When we started out 12, 13 years ago, remember, we spoke about the market as if it was the old copper market. I mean, that was the market size. And it's kept going, and Abram, you've alluded to that, it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and now we're sitting here saying, we're going to connect every single household. Do you think that there's opportunities for your companies to take what you've learned and apply it in the rest of Africa? Or even in Europe? This morning, Vincent Garnier was saying from Europe, they don't know how to build rural like what they've seen here the last couple of days. They are taking some lessons home. So even Europe is looking at how we're doing things here. Do you think that there's opportunities for your companies to go beyond the borders, or if you tell us you have to kill all of us, or not that sensitive?
No, I think there's certainly opportunity in transferring skill, but these businesses don't scale the same way as, say, a software business, right? Every new area or region or country that you go into has its own set of dynamics, its own set of challenges, and, you know, you'll need to deal with those. obviously, if you've done it somewhere before, easier to to deal with those issues the second time around. So yeah, but it's more on a skills transfer and IP type basis as opposed to just doing it exactly the same as what as what we've done it here.
Yeah. Is skill a problem still in South Africa?
It depends in which areas you're looking to fill, but our industry faces the same challenges as other industries in South Africa, and that there's a lot of people immigrating. The brain drain it's a real thing, but we put a lot of time and effort into training people up. We invest in our staff, and we get them up to the level that they need to be in order for us to execute. So,
Janita, if I can just add, I think you look at our skills. I mean, you look at Vuma. I mean, I think I've lost 13 people to Europe. I mean, in the last 8 months, and you look at the founders of Vuma. I mean, they're building in 3-4 places in the UK at this point at speed. So they're absolutely shaping the market in Europe. So you get these pockets. If you look at Portugal, I mean, they're leading the fiber deployment in Europe at this point. But you look at both Portugal and Spain doing well, but there's pockets like a lot of the other countries don't exactly know how to do it because they were pivoting around the big mobile operators, the T-Mobiles and the Vodafones of the world. So I think we can teach a lot of the places. Eastern Europe, definitely. I mean, we can definitely look at giving skill into those countries. That's the first thing. And I think if you look at Africa, it has to make sense, because it's untouched at this point. You look at the penetration, and it's a huge country mass. So your volume, I mean, but you must also not make the mistake of thinking there's nothing happening in Africa. I mean, you look at Liquid's network going all the way up to basically Egypt, using different sectors of whatever. I was in Addis Ababa about a month and a half ago. I mean, it's basically nothing happening, but listen, there's not nothing there.
Yeah.
So I'm saying is, it's not reinventing the wheel. I think we must take our knowledge and our learnings from here, and we can apply it in a lot of the places in Africa. But what they're using in a place like a Dar es Salaam or in a Kinshasa is working at this point.
Yeah.
So I think we can also always question the quality of it. And yes, we've got the volumes of people that can support it. And you've got economies, some of the economies strong currency based, like a dollar-based economies. But we mustn't be fooled that nothing's happening in Africa. There's quite a bit of things happening in Africa. And they're quite advanced, some of these markets. I mean, and you should add to that, please.
No, I think, if I take, you probably know in South Africa we don't do the home market, right? But I mean, in Zambia we do the home market, Rwanda we do fiber to the home, in Kenya we've got a fiber to the home business. I'm reminded, Dietlof, of the days when we launched 3G in 2008 in Dar es Salaam. You never thought to yourself, hey, what will a video call be able to do at that point in time in Africa? And actually, if you look at 5G just having been launched in Tanzania now about a month ago by Vodacom, they need fiber to the site. Once you do fiber to the site, there is fiber there. I take our fiber network there. Once you're there, you start to realize, but actually, hey, I can go into adjacent segments. If you think about our market, take the likes of DFA that started out as a fiber-to-site business model, right? Which then, because of the requirements in home, led to a fiber-to-the-home market. I think, the reality is that the guys, they also have a smart TV. They also have a Netflix use case. They're also actually streaming services and have also these hundreds of gigs of requirements. So I just personally believe that the demand of data in Africa will be the same. If you take big markets, they will go that way. And I think that, I take our business, we actually go and learn quite a bit in our African opcos about how to sometimes apply lessons learned back into our scenarios. And I think specifically as we go into these low-cost areas, we've on purpose partnered with Google in Project Tara to bring, this free space optical communication technology into Africa because of the fact that fiber will go to a certain distance. But if I take the Congo-Brazzaville River example, there are spaces in South Africa where you can't build a fiber over a certain area, and you would need to have a technology that's going to bridge that, and we can go and find practical fiber solutions. But there's other technologies that can do that effectively as well, and it's about how do we utilize that. But I think outside of the requirement of European people potentially taking our assets, like the example Dietlof is using, I mean, we firmly believe as a group that Africa is a great place for us from a growth perspective. If we look at our financials, you know, our key markets are doing really well in those markets. And remember, it's not only home, right? You also have enterprises. I mean, our Pan-African enterprise business is growing significantly as people are saying, hey, yes, I want SD-WAN for Standard Bank in South Africa, but guess what? I also want that in Kenya. I also want it in Tanzania. So the requirements are the same. Cloud services, unfortunately, is a big driver of that, right? And we shouldn't forget the hyperscale impact. If I take our data center demand, yes, we're building massively in South Africa on the data center side, but our project Decima, we're building 10 data centers outside of South Africa. Why? Because hyperscalers, Microsoft is doing cloud services. Cloud services is changing the game, and that is going to change the market requirement, how people interact with these services. And that will require masses of capacity.
Yeah.
So the market dynamics are the same. It's just maybe a couple of years behind that.
So we're going to close up, but in closing, Abram, if you had that wand and you could do anything, what is that one thing that you would walk out and wave that wand today and fix?
I think we've touched on everything here, but you know, you alluded to what can government, for instance, do for us. I think the biggest thing is really solve crime for us. You know, get rid of the forums, like make sure there's no corruption, because that will speed up things. I think, you know, everything is in a good place at the moment in terms of where we are with the industry and in terms of momentum that we've gained in the industry. I think from a regulatory and competition perspective, it's just to make sure that, you know, we don't over-consolidate, but at the same time, you know, not to become too restrictive that, you know, we actually start starving the industry. But definitely exciting things happening. I think, as you said, you know, it's really interesting seeing what our horizons were 5 years ago, you know, in terms of what we thought we could actually penetrate to what we think now. It's also very interesting to see, you know, a lot of the old faces now actually setting up roots in other countries as well.
Yeah.
So we have a huge export actually of skills into other countries. So yeah, no, it's very exciting.
Jan?
No, if I had a magic wand, I'd remove those obstacles that I mentioned. I mean,
Same thing.
if we could get rid of those, you know, we could go even faster.
Business forums, vandalism,
Yeah,
those things.
overbuild.
Overbuilds. And just like 5 years ago, it was like, I think everybody would have said, yeah, no access to funding, or 10 years ago, access to funding. That was like the big conversation. I suspect that those days are over now. I think there's...
Well, they're over in as long as we don't duplicate capital and have poor performing assets. Because like I said, as quickly as it comes, it can leave. So we need to deploy in the right areas, and we shouldn't duplicate.
That's right. Dietlof, your magic wand?
I would just connect. I would love to see, if I can go, I would connect every house. You know, I think, and I'll go back to the education challenge we got in the country. I think if we can do it quick, that's what we have to do. We have to stay competitive with the rest of the world. Like I said, you know, the gap we closed early 2000s in a Congo, for instance, where we skipped technologies. We could never get faxes to work. We could, they were still using telegrams and there were no postal services. And suddenly we skipped it. But the gap that we closed there will be much, much smaller than the gap that's being created with us and the rest of the world if we can't connect. So if I can do it, I would connect every house as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of our problems will be solved that way. Dion, your challenge is slightly different.
Yeah, I think that maybe if I can, maybe part of the discussion which we have, because I think Jan and Abram and Dietlof touch on them, but I just think as a country, you know, my magic wand would be, can we have a bit of optimism about our country and our continent? Because while we talk about, you know, the adjacent opportunities that sits outside of our continent, you know, I look at the performances of each of these businesses and compare them to world benchmarks, we're actually doing really well. And I think sometimes the fact that we have a massive amount of people are leaving, it's actually about the sentiment that we create. Yes, we're in an interesting environment. Yes, we have load shedding. But to be quite frank, many guys are making quite a bit of money out of the initiatives that they're driving outside of that. And I don't think any of these businesses would have been there if government, for example, solved them. So I think for us, actually, and that's my challenge for us as an industry, is, as you said earlier, is let's don't stop dreaming, you know. Let's keep on dreaming about the impossible, and let's use South Africa as that vehicle into the rest of Africa.
Yeah. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your time. I know you're busy. And I harassed you to be here today, but I really appreciate taking time out. I think it's valuable for people to get to know you as well, you know, and to also learn a little bit more about your visions and, you know, who you are as people. I want to thank you guys for backing the Digital Council and for believing in our vision and helping us do our work. It really means a lot. And to put on events like this, thanks for your financial support as well. Dion, you guys also, you're always behind us, always backing us. So we're very fortunate that all of these companies serve on the board of the Digital Council. If you will join me in giving these oaks a really loud clap.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Sean.
Please welcome a presentation on connecting Atlantic to Indian Ocean in Africa, Crossing Africa, by the Group CEO of C2, Landry Kolade.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for taking your time to be at this presentation. I'm going to take you through what I call a journey on this continent, about why you want to connect the entire continent. Africa is a country, or is a continent of 1.4 billion people, approximately, and with a very high poverty rate, like we know, and we know we can't build enough schools, but at least we can leapfrog and move to the next level by getting our people connected, okay? The basics of what we believe connectivity will do is practically to unleash the latent energy that is actually with our people right now. So I'm going to take you through a very simple journey and as to why we believe connecting the east and the west coast submarine cables and across the countries will actually help us. So the first thing I'm going to talk about, and which has been highlighted in the last 2 days, has actually been basically about skills, okay? You have people learning, going to school, you have people learning and understanding technology, but you don't have the opportunities on the ground. So the basic ethos of C2 is actually how do we democratize opportunities, how do we democratize internet opportunities, and also how do we democratize the fact that connectivity becomes more like a utility on this continent, okay? So when you have skills, the last thing you want to do is make those skills and get them exported out. You want them to be on the ground on the continent and to use them. But before you can do that, you need to have connectivity to every nook and cranny of this continent. The belief of C2 is one that delivers on that ambition. And that ambition is connect every nook and cranny of this continent and get people to deliver on their ambitions, okay? We believe in C2 that you only need two basic things. You need people to be able to read, you need them to be able to write, and after that, connect them to the internet and leave the rest to them. That is our belief in C2. Okay? So the content of this presentation is more, like I said, a story. I'm going to tell you who C2 is. I'm going to tell you what the state of the connectivity on the continent is, and why they want to move from the Indian Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean, and what development impact this will be, and what are the current trends and the connectivity options, and a basic trend and case study analysis. I showed that video earlier just to give you a snapshot of what we've done in a very small country of Togo of less than 9 million people, and what that impact has done for that country. Okay? So C2 is a Pan-African company. A lot of people may not know about it yet, but it was founded in actually 2011 as a project within Google called Project Link, and then in 2017 actually brought in 3 other shareholders. Andile Njaba, Dr. Andile Njaba is actually our chairman of C2 and from Convergent Partners. And then we have Google, IFC, and also Mitsui, which are also a very good representation here. Now, the vision of C2, like I said, is connecting broadband to everybody, open access, wholesale infrastructure. What we want to do is we want to remove that monopoly that you currently have within the industry where somebody owns fiber and they block everybody out at a very high price. So we want to make it in some price. Fiber is everywhere. You saw the example that was given earlier about Brazil, where smaller ISPs in small localities are actually the drivers of the economy. So once that infrastructure is in place, which is analogous to building roads, okay? Once that infrastructure is in place, we want everybody to be able to use it. We don't want operators to actually have a monopoly of infrastructure and be able to do this. So what is our coverage? We're currently in 7 countries. We're in Liberia, we're in Ghana, we're in Togo, we're in Uganda, which was the first market that was launched in 2013, and we're in Kenya, and then recently we're in the DRC, okay? The potential is to go to every country where we can and connect the entire countries in Africa. Okay? Now, the state of connectivity on the continent, it is expensive right now, so we want to make it cheaper. If it is cheaper, people get to use it more, okay? What we are, a lot of the discussion here is about the digital divide. During the pandemic, a lot of us in this room had our kids going to school because they have internet connection in their homes. A lot of the kids in the villages and a lot of homes don't even have internet in Africa, okay? Which meant we have that digital divide increasing again within the context of what we've seen with the pandemic. So one of the reasons is this is a big problem, and that's why some of the things that we need to talk about and C-Squared needs to happen. Digital inclusion, okay? It's a very big part of everything. If you are not connected right now, you're actually not doing anything. You need to be on the internet, otherwise Africa will be left behind, and I'm actually very scared that we may actually have a form of digital colonization happen again if we are not very careful. Okay, so Africa must need to be within the forefront of everything. So accessibility is also an issue. Okay, if you have 2.7 billion people in the world right now that don't have internet access, Africa is actually maybe more than half of that number, which is a problem. Okay, we need to wake up as a continent and spend the right amount of investment. We may not have the money that was being talked about earlier with the guys from the US and the subversion, but African government must make a deliberate effort to invest in its people and invest in that medium. Okay. The basic issue that we've seen, like I mentioned earlier about connectivity within the African continent, is that a lot of homes don't even have power, not to talk of having internet access, okay? A lot of people also have not eaten, okay? So we have different problems. But you see, ignorance is also a problem, okay? Because ignorance is actually our biggest problem. So if our governments are very deliberate about their actions, they will spend the right amount of money to get these things to happen, okay? If you connect internet access in a village and you connect it into maybe a community center, and everybody has access to that community center, you'll be surprised how lives will be changed in that community center where people learn how to do basic things, okay? How to better their lives and how to actually get things done. So invariably, we need Africa to be taken to the next level. You were hearing what the panelists of this, the last panelists were talking about earlier about the fact that there's an overbuild of infrastructure in South Africa. We don't have that problem in the rest of Africa. Okay, we have a problem that we don't even have money to do a lot of things. Okay, we need to even connect one house, not to talk of having 4 connections into a house. So I've actually reached out to some of the guys that were talking earlier. If you have too much money to spend, please come and give some of that to me because we need that money to develop on the rest of the continent. So we need to connect Africa, okay? And like I mentioned earlier, digital illiteracy is a big problem, and we need to get a leapfrog. Okay. Now, a lot of discussions we had yesterday about the effect of GDP, of internet and broadband and all that, and I won't bore you with this, but these are data that is very, 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 very interesting and needs to be done. Okay, I mentioned earlier that 1.4 billion, only about 40% of us have access to a form of internet. We're talking about less than 20 or 30% of us having access to broadband internet. And when I'm talking about internet here, some people only see internet on their phones, okay, just to do Facebook and things like that. They don't have access to the high-speed thing that you talk about when somebody was talking earlier about 100 meg to a house, okay? We don't have that luxury in a lot of African countries. So it's important to understand these dynamics. Okay? So why do we want to connect between the East and the West? This growth is an important factor. And that important factor has to do with the fact that cost of development, okay, of connecting this continent. You saw part of the submarine discussions yesterday about latency between South Africa and Europe and about the fact that all the major investments are done on the submarine cables, okay? We need to interconnect Africa. There is the Africa Free Trade Zone initiative that has been done. If we don't interconnect Africa, then we are in trouble. Okay, and I mean this literally. Because in West Africa, I can give you an example. If you want to go from one country to another sometimes, you might need to have to fly into Paris and then fly back into that country. When delivery is just a direct flight of an hour, okay? That is an expensive venture, okay? So that is one of the things that we need to do. So we need to be able to unleash the potential of everybody, and growth will come. So it's a value-adding thing if you can connect from east to west because it drop down cost, okay? There is Google Equiano, there is To Africa, there are a lot of submarine cables. What are these submarine cables doing for us in Africa? They are letting us connect to consume services from Europe, okay, and from the Americas. That is not a sustainable venture. You talk about Nollywood in Nigeria and the music industry in Nigeria. Everybody here must have listened to Nigerian music at one point or the other, okay? Congo music, Rumba music is also an important music genre right now. But guess what? The bulk of that data and the bulk of that music is in YouTube and in data centers in the US. These guys now come and give us fiber into Africa, submarine fiber. And then we need to consume our own data and pay them to consume our data, okay? So you must understand that if you interconnect Africa and you have data centers on this continent, the cost of accessing that data, one, goes down, your people make the money deliberately themselves, and the capital stays here. So you're talking about brain drain and things like that. The only way we can intensify that is interconnectivity of this continent, okay? So the initiative of localizing data is very, very paramount. It's actually an existential thing that we need to survive as a continent. We cannot, and I repeat, we cannot be digitally colonized. And that is what will happen if we don't localize our own content, okay? Environmental sustainability is also an issue, and something that I think we should also very talk about. Edge computing, the market is a very huge market. Right now, if you have a lot of kids that have to do with online gaming and things like that, they can't actually compete in that genre because of latency. You are sitting in Cape Town, you are playing an online game, which is actually a big thing right now, a very massive business. And you are doing that and competing with somebody that is in the US. You can't win because of latency of up to 200 milliseconds. Before you take an action, the guy has already killed whatever thing you're doing. So it's actually a problem. So localization of data is also one that we need. So connecting east to west reduces that latency and helps us do it better. Now, what is the challenge? Like I talked about earlier, it's an intra-connectivity ecosystem, so it drives other things within the ecosystem. You get to optimize connectivity, which is also a very big deal because then the cost is lower and more people can access it, which is our biggest challenge. It enables all the technologies here, okay? The experience is better, okay? Analytics and cloud are things that are happening. You want data to be closer to you. It transforms the way you do business. We see a lot of fintech businesses being valued. We have actually about 5 unicorns in Africa right now, okay? The bulk of them are fintech businesses. Why do we need Uber, Bolt, and those apps from Europe and America? Why can't there be a Uber South Africa that is actually locally used and used for these markets? Why are we paying somebody that is sitting in San Francisco money for making a ride, okay, between Santon and the airport? Why? Okay? These are the things that will happen. The only way these things can change is if we tap into this. China doesn't have that problem, okay? Their softwares are locally softwares, and the technologies are local. Who are the bulk of the people that are in these industries in Europe and the rest? Basically Indians and Africans, okay? Yesterday, there was a statistic that was put up that talked about like there were 700,000 software developers in Africa, okay? And the lady talked about Bangalore only having 400,000 of that. 1.4 billion people with 700,000 software developers, that is a problem. So we need to increase that scale. So digital transformation is something that we need to do, and we need to do it well. Okay. Now, I love this map because it shows me my beautiful continents. And I am very proud of this continent. So these are the options that I want to do to connect between the east and the west, to reduce that latency that was being discussed earlier. If I'm in, the first option there talks about being in Mombasa, in Kenya, and then going into Uganda, and then going to the DRC, okay, and I'll be able to transverse those and connect both continents. The cheapest option is actually going through 2 countries, which is Tanzania and and the DRC, okay? C-Squared is present in the first option of the 3 countries. We are not present in Tanzania yet, but it's something that we're working on. So these are the options of the connectivity option between the two regions. This is capital intensive. We've talked earlier, a lot of people have mentioned the fact that fiber is a big business, but you need patient capital for fiber, okay? For you to connect between this DRC, Uganda, and Kenya, you will need upward of 7,000 kilometers of fiber in the middle of the bush, okay? Who will use that infrastructure? When you build that infrastructure, you'll be able to connect villages. You cannot do this just on a business case. So this must mainly be a social capitalism kind of thing, okay? There is a social impact, but then you are making money. But you're not going to make the times of money that you think you're making in terms of the margins. But will the impact on the environment be huge? Yes. Will the impact on the people be huge? Yes, okay? So this kind of investment cannot be just a commercial bank investment. It must be a DFI, a government intervention, or a PPP kind of thing, okay? So we are approximately saying if you are going to build this, without looking at just the fiber alone, $125 million for the first thing. You can't get that money easily. So C-Squared is open to partnerships with government, with anybody, just to get this thing to actualize. It's an issue within Africa right now where regulation, okay, some of the regulations that we have are not ripe for this time. They are just regulations that have been, if you can imagine that some people still have telecom laws that are as dated as the 60s, okay? That is the reality. They are not for the digital age. So until you can get people to understand the intricacies of this, then we have a problem. So the cheapest one there will be to connect between Tanzania and the DRC, okay, which is just going to be 95 million. But this is only on the dark fiber part of it. I'm actually not talking about the hardware that you're going to put to light up. I'm not talking about the power. You know, those are other intricacies. So this cost is actually just a basic cost of saying put the fiber in and then let's see how it evolves. So the optimal investment would be the Tanzania DRC one. But you see what this does, it reduces significant latencies for people. It also increases resiliency, okay? There are a lot of problems about the resiliency. You have a lot of cables on the east, you have a lot of cable on the west. If anything happens and there is a break in one of the cables or the particular route, maybe a hurricane or a very massive force majeure that might happen, you can actually transverse across the continent and reduce that distance, and that will be very, very efficient. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier about local content and the fact that this is very, very significant. The fiber infrastructure on this continent is still primarily being driven by government. Okay, but honestly, we need a lot of PPPs to get these things to happen because the governments are not, as we know, are not that efficient. And I heard earlier also that in South Africa here, there are some government interventions to give money, and some of the panelists were saying they don't want the money. I want the money, so if they can give me some of that in the rest of Africa, I'll use them just to get these things to happen. So local content hosting, which I mentioned earlier, latency reducing graphically that will help us to get things done better. When latency is lower, I spoke earlier about data centers being co-located. People get to access that data from everywhere in the world, and then the experience is better. So this connectivity, this thing is needed. Okay? You need $100 billion to connect the whole of this continent. That is an estimate that was done by very smart people, not like myself, okay? I know that I need just to do them in a piecemeal, one country at a time, okay? Because if you want to do a very big deal, you need to start it first, and that is how we see this. 1.1 billion unique users on the continent needs to be connected. Out of that $100 billion as an estimate, 90 billion of it is of sub-Saharan Africa. You heard earlier when the guy from EMEA was talking about Egypt, Algeria, and the rest being very well connected, and the fact that even in UAE, they have about 60% of the penetration that has already been done. We don't have that. We have less than that in this part of the world. So this is assuming even that the connection to a house is 100 meg. Okay? I don't think anybody in this room understands what a 100 meg is anymore because you don't use that kind of speed. But a 100 meg to a guy in Burkina Faso is a big deal. 100 meg to a guy in Mali is a big, big deal. Even to somebody that is in Burundi, okay? 10 meg is a very big deal. And these are life-changing things. Now, what C-Squared believes in is that it must be open access. It must be wholesale so that the initiatives, okay, and the value creation by the ISPs is on value and no longer on infrastructure. They compete on value, and that value translates to low cost and also translates to superior services to the end users. What are the trends that will support these case studies that we mentioned? Okay, I mentioned earlier about the Africa Free Trade Zone. I am fortunate to be from the beautiful country of Nigeria, and in West Africa we have this thing that was launched in 1976, which is the free travel across West Africa. And I repeat, 1976. So it's not something that was even thought about now. It was then. So which means with the Nigerian passport, I can travel to any of the West African countries without a visa. All I need to do is just get myself on the road and I'm there. Okay? This is something that should have happened with the Africa Free Trade Zone thing, which is what I believe they want to do. Okay? Two countries also in Africa right now, Mauritius and Rwanda, have a similar principle. All you need to go to these countries is an African passport. Okay, you land there, you get in. You don't even need to tell anybody you are coming. You don't need to do any application online and all that. This is significant, and I believe these are the trends that will make us want to connect ourselves. Okay, previously, between a call that is made between Nigeria or between Lagos and Cotonou, which are neighboring countries, which you can actually drive in within 30 minutes. That call will be routed through Monaco in France, in Europe, and then sent back to Cotonou. Okay, somebody in Europe is making money from me calling my brother across the border. Okay, we need to change all this, and this is what Africa Free Trade Zone will do. And you can see a lot of initiatives that have been done, even by the forex and the currency translations between the continent right now. Okay, urbanization is a big deal. Everybody wants to go to the cities because that's where the opportunities are. But we argue that this trend cannot continue because our cities cannot grow as fast as the people that are coming in. So you need to also fiberize and put data in the villages. And I'm sure a lot of people want to go and stay in very beautiful places that are not polluted with what we have in the cities, you know. So we need to connect that. Okay. Now, I've mentioned earlier about digital transformation and about the effect of the GTP when you do connect, and that is an issue that we need to do about. Okay. So if the internet by 2025, you have 180 billion contributed to the African economy. The question is how much of this 180 billion generated is actually for Africans, okay? And localization is actually important. And I think we need to understand that in as much as there is a market available, the question is how much of it is resting on this continent. And I think the onus is on us to make sure that bulk is stayed here, so that it is reinvested here, and so that it can actually generate opportunities for our people. Okay? This was the stat that was also put up yesterday, and this was what I was alluded to earlier, about the fact that 700K of people, the talent that we have on this continent, and you can see, I mentioned also that 400K of that alone in a place like Bangalore, which is significant, okay? India has 1 billion people, and they have only for one city, 400K. And Africa has 1.4 billion, and we have just 700,000, okay? So it's a problem. We need to get this done. The video I showed earlier mentioned Togo, which is actually there. What we have is a PPP between the government and C-Squared. We've landed a Equiano in Togo. You will see the maps that were put up. Or if you go online right now in the Equiano map, you will only see a connectivity between Europe, Nigeria, and South Africa. Okay, that means initially when it was put on paper and designed, nobody thought about the smaller countries. Okay, but Google being a shareholder in C-Squared, we approached them and we sold the idea to them. And Togo was the first country that was connected on the Equiano. Okay, it's not on the map or anything, but it is there. The cable is on the ground. It will be live once Equiano is live. It was commissioned in March 2022. Okay, this is a deliberate effort by the government, and like I said, I deliberately showed that video initially just to explain to you and see how a government that is deliberate and that is very determined, okay, can get this done. Togo, a small country, like I said, of less than 9 billion people, will actually be leading Africa very soon in cybersecurity because they are doing that deliberately. So the intention to connect Equiano submarine is that country will be having not less than 3T of capacity. Will they use it? No. Okay? But they have positioned themselves to be a data center hub. They have positioned themselves to be a cyber security hub. They have positioned themselves to be a transit for international rapidity to other countries, Ghana, Benin, and Burkina, which are bordering countries within them. Okay? Now, what we've done with that partnership is actually, like I said, submarine lands, but it is inefficient for submarine cable capacity like Ftth to land. What do you do with it? You need to transport it off from the coast, okay? So we've partnered with the government, and we're using the OPGW cables over the power lines, okay? We're to commission that and put the capacity on it. And then we're also going to do metros in the provinces just to get that deal. So it's a very big and massive undertaking, one that I'm very proud of. And it took us 2 years to actually negotiate this transaction, but it's something that we've done. Ghana is also a country where we are currently in as Ftth. We have about 2,000 kilometers of fiber only in Accra, and we're planning to cover the whole of the country. And we've done a deal also with Gridco, which is the power electricity company, similar to your own Transcom or Escom, and that is also to use OPGW fiber to connect remote areas where they're not connected. And this is actually one that is actually doing right now, and we're working. Now, Liberia, which is a case in point, and was a deal that we did with the US aid. I'm sure you all know how Ebola ravaged Liberia recently, some years ago. One of the studies that was found was that, look, if there was communication at that time, information would have been disseminated faster and people wouldn't have died as much as they did, okay? So a deliberate investment was made in that regard, and we connected about 200 kilometers of fiber in Monrovia alone, one that you might think is insignificant, but 50 government institutions were connected, okay? This is things that you guys take, a lot of people take for granted, but it has changed the lives of the people in Liberia, okay? It has reduced the cost of internet access. ACE that landed was able to be propagated. We are currently building a 350-kilometer backbone, okay, to connect Monrovia to Gangata at the border of Guinea, okay, just to connect other provinces in Togo. So, and I must say, this deal was not possible commercially, okay? So it needed a grant from USAID. So we did a counterpart funding thing, and we got it done. But those are the kind of things that we are very passionate about at Ftth. Okay? So thank you very much. Asante sana. Merci beaucoup.
Next, introducing an interview with the main question in mind: what does the new model bylaws mean for the deployment of infrastructure?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm aware that we've got a very short time slot, and we're standing between you and your lunch, and we want to be able to finish very promptly. My name is Jenny Cargill. I had a company called Strategy Execution Advisors. We've been involved in this project we're talking about, but really our focus is on how do you, in a sense, put delivery and steroids in governments and get better results. And I'm going to introduce you now to Dominique Sebe. And Dominique, no, sorry, Dominique, sorry, Desheko. I've got the mixed up now ready. I've started well.
We've got married.
And you've got the female name passed on.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Desheko is, she's been chairing this initiative on behalf of Operation Vulindlela, which with the model bylaw that we're going to talk to you about. She originates out of the private sector. She was with Shanduka, and she went into the policy space, first of all going through BUSA, Business Unity South Africa, and then to the presidency, looking at infrastructure and investment, and is currently sort of sharing her life between Operation Vulindlela and as an advisor to the MEC for Economic Development in Gauteng. With the case of Dominique, I think Dominique I've got down as just the owner of, or a owner of Ellipsis Regulatory Solutions. I think that all of you should know Dominique very well. He's very well known. And if you don't, you should then know he is an incredible, probably the best digital lawyer in South Africa. So you should get to know him if you don't know him. And that's all I'm going to say on Dominique. And basically, what we're here to look at is a model bylaw, which is called the sort of standard draft bylaws for the deployment of electronic communications and facilities. And this was gazetted on September 17 for public comment. And it's really a model bylaw that addresses the regulatory environment of infrastructure investment within municipal boundaries. It is one of the projects of 26 projects that is been, over which Operation Vulindlela has oversight and responsibility. So it's one of the presidential priorities, this project. And what's interesting when you look at the list of all the projects that the president has up, you've got very, very headline-catching projects, which you will all know about, like reducing load shedding, getting from road to rail, mega projects. And here is this project, which looks rather innocuous, dealing with a model bylaw for municipalities around digital infrastructure. And so really, I think it's what makes this so important. And that's my question to you, Diseko. Why is this got such prominence as a presidential priority, this issue, and why does it really matter to us at all?
Thanks, Jenny. So the deployment of electronic communications infrastructure is really critical to providing access to quality and affordable digital infrastructure for our people. And in order to attain that, the practical aspects of rolling out digital infrastructure within the country, especially within municipalities, was a bottleneck that we are experiencing, and we needed to really streamline that process. So we have 257 municipalities in this country, and each and every municipality has its own individual bylaw. Some did have bylaws and some did not. And this process under Operation Vulindlela, where the president found it quite pertinent and important to streamline and fast-track the development of broadband access through the government's phase 2 of SA Connect, which seeks to provide 80% broadband access within the country. And in order to do that, we needed systems and processes to fast-track the deployment of digital infrastructure investment in the country. And we started with Operation Vulindlela, which I was chairing, to establish the country's first model bylaw, where all municipalities could have a draft to look at and work with. They could choose to use it or not, but at least those in deep rural areas who did not have the capacity and the knowledge of drafting these bylaws and what it meant for them now had access to that through our process. We started the process last year to start this after the SONA address, and it was quite a long process that we went through in getting the private sector involved and getting partnerships with different and affected government departments. But it is critical for us to really look at how we provide access and how we provide digital inclusion for our people through the government's plans of SA Connect Phase 2 of this, reaching this 80% target of broadband infrastructure.
Okay. And perhaps you can give us a little bit more about the kind of partnerships that you put together. And you head a task team. What has that entailed? I mean, who is this task team? How did this happen? Because it looks like you've managed to use a sort of collaborative approach in order to get this done. Could you just give us a little bit of insight on that?
So the task team was created last year, as I said, with various departments within national government. And then we cascaded it down all the way to local government. So we involved and targeted really deep rural municipalities within the country to ensure that they had access to the knowledge sharing that was going to happen within the task team, the expertise that Dominic and yourselves as SEA provided for us. And it was in partnership also with the private sector, so the Digital Council Africa played a critical role in that. And bringing together private sector entities that were going to share their experiences within various municipalities, what was going wrong, where things could be improved, and how they could assist with regards to streamlining that and getting us into a process where we're all sitting at one table, collaborating for the common goal of getting to a standardized, streamlined model bylaw for all of these 257 municipalities. But mostly, COCTA was leading the helm of that, because this falls under the Municipal Systems Act, and we were really assisted by, I'd really need to mention our colleagues Tabang Lesita and Sonwabile, the legal team at Cocktail, who really assisted quite a lot in getting all of the various municipalities on board across the country, and doing the workshops that we did, the engagement sessions that, around this bylaw and what we were looking to achieve. So the collaborative approach with various government departments, expertise, legal teams such as Dominic, project management experts such as yourselves, around our special officers within government, really did assist in getting us to the goal of having this bylaw out for public comment by October. So we're really quite pleased with the approach of a collaboration between private sector, different various government departments, experts, and anybody who was willing to assist and volunteer their services.
Yeah. And I think, although this has gone out for public comment now, I think what Duseko is saying is that there's been a huge amount of comment already accommodated, a huge amount of input. So it comes from the metros already, other municipalities. Yes. So it's not a surprise to many people. And to Juanita, who's organizing this, and she's been a key role in terms of keeping the private sector up to speed on what's happening and getting their input. So I think it sets a good precedent on how to go about doing this kind of work, because it's not a big surprise to everybody as they see, for example, the bylaw for public comment. It has already gone through some process of engagement. Dominique, I mean, what does it mean to say this is now this is a bylaw that falls under the Municipal Systems Act? It's not what everybody in this audience would be familiar with. And just give us some insight into what that means. Has that got any practical relevance for operators and developers?
Thanks, Jenny, and good afternoon to everyone. I think it's a critical point, so I'm assuming that most of the people in this room are from the fiber side of the telecoms industry or involved in telecoms industry and not really involved with local government. So when you look at these draft bylaws and you think, I want to make a comment and I'm a bit concerned that it doesn't cover this or it doesn't cover that, please bear in mind that this is not a Department of Communications and Digital Technologies process. It's not an ICASA process. It does not come from the 2016 ICT policy white paper. This is a process which is rooted in local government, and it's intended to assist local government to standardize their approach and to develop the capacity to deal with their own infrastructure. Now, by happy coincidence, a lot of that dealing with its own infrastructure is when it is processing way leaves or other requests for permission from fiber network operators or telcos to access that municipality's land or its property. So what we've got here, and again, the context is critical, is we've got this Municipal Systems Act process to develop a set of bylaws as a standard which municipalities can adopt. That helps the municipalities to regulate their own assets, and it helps industry in terms of standardizing the application form, the time periods, the approach that each municipality is going to take. So it becomes easier for you as a telco to do your planning and your rollout. Very importantly, this is limited to access to public land. Okay? This is not about knocking on a private landowner's door and saying to them, we now wish to deploy facilities, build a tower on your private property. That is a part of a separate process, which is the rapid deployment policy process that does sit with the Department and the Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies. So the process we're talking about today, we've got a set of draft bylaws purporting to access, to regulate access by telecommunications companies to public land owned, administered by municipalities. And then on the other side, coming out of DCDT shortly, you will see the finalized rapid deployment policy. That's the one that was released for comment about 2 years ago and caused chaos in terms of people thinking it allowed operators to come and build 5G towers without compensation. That has been refined. As I understand it, it is with Cabinet for approval. So that policy will come out, and then the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa, ICASA, will take steps to translate that policy into regulation. And that regulation will say, under what circumstances may I, as an FNO or a licensee, engage with a private landowner, enter upon their land in order to deploy facilities? What kind of compensation do I need to pay them? And what happens if there's a dispute? So 2 processes, one for public land, one for private land. The private land, that's a DCDT process that's coming out. The public land is what we're talking about today, and really to stress that in terms of intergovernmental work, this has been quite significant. The problem with our national ICT white paper in 2016 in this respect is that we were so focused on being one vertical, the telecoms industry. Rapid deployment only applies to us. We were so focused we forgot to talk to the people who own the infrastructure and the property over which we were going to build. So when the rapid deployment policy says municipalities must do this or must process applications at cost, we need to accept now that no one ever asked the municipalities about that. And that is part of what is going on at the moment. Jenny?
Yeah, great. Dominique, could you give us some insight into the model bylaw and what's different? You know, what would strike anybody when they look at it that says this has taken something in a different direction or added something that may get criticism but hopefully favorable?
Thanks, Jenny. So I think the first thing you'll find if you look at it is that it's not as different as you think it will be.
Yeah.
Okay? Because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We've worked with a select group of local government and provincial government authorities and looked at what exists. There's a lot that exists that works that we don't need to reinvent. So one part of it is really just taking the best practices out and codifying those into this set of bylaws, which are available for adoption. But there are instances where it's necessary to push things. And there are instances where we can't push things. So let's start with the latter first. The first gap which most people will point to is to say, but this doesn't regulate the fees charged by municipalities for access to the road reserve. This doesn't charge other fees. We've seen that certain metropolitan municipalities in South Africa have upped their fees hundreds of % over the last 10 years. And there are massive discrepancies now between the different municipalities. It'll be a 2,500 Rand non-refundable application fee over there, but
deposit.
over there, 250,000 Rand non-refundable application fee. Why haven't we dealt with that? Because it is constitutionally a local government competence. Okay? It's not something which national government or anyone else can dictate to local government. Local government, in terms of the Municipal Systems Act and the Municipal Finance Management Act, develop their own tariff policy. Every year they go through an internal budgeting process and produce a revenue and expenditure framework, which is published for comment in March, April, every single year by every municipality. And the municipal financial year runs to end June, so on 1st July you will find a new statement of revenue and expenditure and new, for example, wayleaf tariffs for that municipality. It's not something that can be dictated to them. Does that mean we're not concerned about it? Absolutely not. It just means that it's not an issue which can be resolved through the publishing of bylaws. There need to be further engagements, and Desheko will reference that a little bit later. I know time is tight, but just to mention, you're still going to need to get permission to deploy your fiber, but we're expanding those areas. It's not just about deploying in the road reserve anymore. The operators want access to poles. They want access to buildings. Aerial fiber is the favorite deployment method being used at the moment to make sure that we lower the cost of fiber deployments from 17 to 18,000 Rand per home passed to what is now around 3,000 to 4,000 Rand per home passed, which means we can pass a lot more homes with different peoples living in them. So it broadens the interaction between municipalities and licensees. And then the last thing I'll mention is that the bylaw takes a lifetime of the facility approach. A way leave is a temporary permission to go and work in the road reserve or on municipal land. So you get a way leave for 6 months to go and deploy your fiber or to do whatever it is you're doing. And then you exit the picture. And there's no longer really a relationship between that local government and the person who deployed that facility, that infrastructure. We want to push towards a lifetime of the facility agreement between the municipality and the owner-operator licensee in respect of those facilities or that network. We need to know that there will be someone responsible for taking that tower down and rehabilitating that land in 15 years' time when we're all not around, because there's an agreement that puts that in place. And sorry, Jenny, but finally.
You're fine, you're okay.
It's something which requires a little bit of introspection from industry. Okay? We've been very quick to point the fingers at local government. They're the problem. They caused the delays. But there's no recognition on industry's side that we don't like to share, that we like to be inefficient and build multiple things and dig up pavements. Why? Because it's a competitive industry and we want to make the money. So part of what is going to happen going forward, what we're looking to do is to really shoehorn operators into greater levels of sharing, because that means more efficient use of infrastructure, and that's a broader socio-economic goal. I'll leave it there.
Okay, thanks very much. One of the issues that Dominique has raised is the tariff issue. But of course, the idea is, can we address this at all as one of the issues that we need to look at going forward? And that's a question I have for you, Desheko. What next? This is a bylaw that could sit on the shelf. Whoops, sorry. This is a bylaw that could sit on the shelf. What are you going to do next to ensure that, in fact, it gets taken up by municipalities? What can we expect as a sort of phase 2?
Thank you, Jenny. I'm not sure if we could really, as Dominic said, force or ensure. We could lobby hard. We could encourage. We could motivate and corral municipalities to try and adopt this process into their municipalities. But just talking about the socioeconomic impacts that Dominic was referring to and circling back to that, the tariff issue was an issue that most of the task team members and most of the municipalities we engaged did bring up as a challenge. And as part of the next steps and what is next, we are going to be engaging with National Treasury around the tariff issue and assisting us in helping to model that better for municipalities. And then also we have partnered up with Salga, who very graciously has offered to assist us with provision of at least 3 municipalities, preferably deep rural municipalities, per province in the country. And we will be doing a partnership and training sessions with them in these various municipalities, because we would like to see this policy actually implemented, and we'd like to see how many municipalities will take it on board without, being forceful about it or being pushed to do it. But the recognition of the fact that this bylaw is going to assist greatly with regards to the developmental goals of South Africa. SA Connect Phase 2, 80% broadband rollout within the country, and especially in attracting digital infrastructure investment in our municipalities. So we're doing Phase 2 coming up next after this is promulgated, and we will be going across the country to different municipalities, training and developing further knowledge around developing bylaws, and engaging with, how to engage with the telcos who come in, and we're formulating relationships with private sector between government, but it is now going into a phase of implementation. We don't want another policy in South Africa sitting on the shelf, gaining dust again. Operation Vulindlela is very clear that we are here to implement regulatory reforms and ensure that we have impact and we really develop the digital infrastructure space in the country.
Great, thanks very much. We have a few minutes left. Do we have any questions at all? Are you all happy?
I think there's Jenny, I think
There's
there's
a hand in the
up
back,
there.
Jenny.
Yes, hi. I think we might need a mic for you. Yeah.
Mic
There we
for
go.
Mike.
Well, you have one, so you've got a double mic here. Fantastic initiative, thank you. Much appreciated. Let's not be churlish and complain about how long it's taken us to get here, but a fantastic initiative. I suppose there are two questions. The first is, how do we hold people account for damage to infrastructure? And how do we ensure that municipalities are actually monitoring and ensuring the integrity of the work and the rehabilitation that's done? Because that's something that we as operators get blamed for years after the fact. But by then, contractors have long passed, and it's very difficult for us to go back and have to deal with reinstatements and very frustrated citizens. Second question is, when do we get to do this on the power side? Because wheeling at the moment is, in my mind, the second biggest challenge that we have. When do we get to put a model wheeling framework in place? Because I'm getting really tired about pilots that have been promised for years and that are just not happening. As far as I know, there's only one municipality in the country that actually has a working wheeling framework, and everybody else is just talking about it, some more advanced, and most of them very much less advanced.
Okay, any further questions before we ask Dominique? Yes, Jacques?
Thanks, colleagues. Jack Hossif, I'm one of Ditsecho's handlers in her moonlighting phase at Gauteng Provincial Government. Just to provoke, I think, probably Dominic, as much as Ditsecho, and obviously DT can answer this if she needs to. Clearly there is a gap in the compulsion process is going to be interesting because, so in Gauteng, you're going to have a specifically different approach because the Township Economic Development Act requires that the new bylaws that are being implemented in our township enterprise zones include these kind of provisions. So putting the two together, you'll have a way of legally bringing municipalities to the table to say, do it. I think the trickier question for me, which to some extent builds on the prior question, there is a very real set of, I'd call it borderline corrupt interactions between contractors, developers, municipalities, etc., in the sense that a lot of the parties that are enabling broadband are not necessarily the principal investor. We keep on tripping over situations where there's a third party that says, no, I'm here doing this for Vumatel, I'm here doing this for Dark Fiber Africa, I'm here doing this for, and it's this universe of middlemen have arisen that are basically doing a lot of the installations. And I know that there's discussion about how the industry consolidates, et cetera, et cetera. So I suppose the legal question is also about how do you correctly apportion liability and legal persona and legal standing? Because a lot of what we're getting, so I'll give you a lived example. We've got this one isn't corrupt. This is just a typically complicated scenario. We have a deployment in the Vaal that Vumatel are doing through a third party. The third party has put together the financing, the community interface, a whole range of things. Vumatel is providing the actual fiber deployment mechanism, but it took us a while to work out that the municipality's requirement was that Vumatel be the one that actually applies for the way leave. So that this third-party person couldn't do that, even though they're going to be intimately involved in managing the situation. So one of the things that I'm saying we have to clear up is if there's going to be these increasingly complex arrangements. And there's nothing wrong. I mean, we've got, for example, township ISPs that we are financing and supporting that work with larger players. That kind of diversification is necessary. But it does create this question of who is ultimately at the contractual nexus with the municipality? Who should be the person who carries liability? And one of the reasons this desperately needs to be cleared up is also because what we've seen is that when there is dereliction of duty, when reinstatements are done badly, when communities do face problems, the private sector often descends into a festival of finger pointing about whose responsibility it is. So I'm just suggesting that while the bylaw process is obviously critical to working out the regulatory bottlenecks, a idealized legal framework for accountability and management of when things go wrong is probably an appropriate next step. And I just would want Dominic's comment on that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. Dominique, both is response.
How much time do I have?
We're on time, so we have to be very quick.
Okay.
If you don't mind giving us a couple more minutes before your lunch.
Cool.
Great.
So Jack, thank you. Fantastic question. And Mike, I'm going to go in reverse order. So what is in the bylaw is a proposal that says, actually, there's nothing in law that requires you to have an ECNS or any other license issued by ICASA in order to apply for away leave. And it's commonplace throughout South Africa for a non-licensee to apply for and to receive away leave. So again, we're seeing inconsistency in approaches across provinces and towns and local government. What the draft bylaws, set of bylaws says is there are two relationships which are contemplated here. One is the guy who gets the way leave, to use a simple permission to deploy fiber into the road reserve. And that way leave perforce is 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, extendable, but it's a limited period, and its historical genesis is in the need to regulate traffic and things of that nature. So, cool. But once the way leave holder steps out, we agree that at the moment there seems to be a vacuum. So what we're contemplating or what we're proposing is that there are two forms of municipal agreement that need to be entered into. One is a use agreement, the other one is a lease agreement. And the use agreement for fiber deployed in the road reserve, that is valid for the term, for the lifespan of that fiber, up until its decommissioning and its removal. So we want that chain of responsibility for 15 or 20 years. In the case of a tower company coming in and putting up a big tower, they would obviously have to lease that space. There's a municipal lease agreement, exactly the same thing, that it exists for the duration of the facility and covers then the disposal of, et cetera, et cetera. It allows for the ownership of that tower or that fiber to be transferred during that 5, 10, 15-year period, because commercially we need to be able to do that. But it is within the power then of the municipality through these draft bylaws to ensure that there is always one responsible person. Okay. Mike, the first question was really a one of municipal capability and the capacity which we see at municipalities. So absolutely they have the right to observe the works which are being done, and they should absolutely observe the works being done. I think the challenge is either that in certain municipalities that just doesn't happen because there isn't someone who can do it, or the person who is from the electrical department and they're really not qualified to actually sign off on the civil engineerings for trenching and rehabilitation. So that's part of a broader initiative which we recognize as a challenge. And that nexus of signing off the way leave is an absolutely critical point, because that kind of defines the infrastructure which is going to then be subject to the lease or the use agreement and the further obligations. So that is something that through the process Tshego outlined we're going to be looking at, and using other government bodies to assist with that. And now my post-COVID brain is going to have to think what was the third question.
I think there was wheeling, but of
Wheeling.
course it relates to power.
So Mike, you know, everyone in this room feels the pain. For a long time telecoms lawyer, this is fascinating. This is Telkom Part 2, which is now called ESCOM, going through similar liberalization processes, which are essentially being forced on it by the market. None of this is being voluntarily done. But we're going through now reforms where new licenses are being issued and restrictions. It's, you know, it's telecoms 2003 with one big or two big infrastructure players and then value-added network services licensees, et cetera, et cetera. The good news there is that I think stuff is going to move a lot faster than telecoms.
Definitely.
I think Vodacom's big announcement about it getting its wheeling, et cetera, through a partnership with Eskom and others is the bit of the iceberg that's showing. But there are a lot of, for example, fiber network operators that are currently getting into the energy business. So the crossovers between this network industry and the energy network industry are really strong. The parallels are there. I don't think we're going to struggle for too long before we start to have some really innovative solutions, particularly for companies running distributed infrastructure data centers throughout the country.
Thanks very much. We're really much in time. Desheko, do you want to have a last few words?
No, thank you,
don't?
Jenny.
You don't want to stand
I'm
between
just
lunch and everybody
looking
else?
forward to phase 2 and actually implementing this.
Okay,
and
that's
seeing it through.
marvelous. Thanks very much. I just want to first say one last thing, and that's a big thank you to Juanita Clark from the Digital Council, both giving us this platform to talk about it, but that she is she's played a big role in up to this position, but also in trying to get across the information. Please submit comments if you want to. You've got 30 days, I think, working days
Yes,
from the 17th of September. So if you need to do that, we are appealing to you to do so. And thanks very much.
To our sponsors and partners, thank you for participating.